The little girl ran so fast and collided into the Mafia boss, shaking so hard she could barely breathe as she clung to his jacket and cried, "He's not my dad!" And the moment Angel Siciliano looked past her and saw the man stalking toward the diner door, everything inside him snapped. What he does next cracks open a 30-year secret he's buried and pulls him into a war he swore he'd never fight again. If you're hooked in and want to enjoy this story, go ahead and subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see where everyone's watching. Plus, tomorrow I've got another incredible story lined up, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Alright, back to the story. Her small hands gripped the leather jacket like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Blood streaked across her bruised face, her voice cracking with pure terror. "Please, don't let him take me. He's not my dad." The diner went dead silent. Forks stopped mid-air. Coffee cups froze halfway to lips. Every customer turned to stare. But the man this terrified child had chosen wasn't a hero. He was Angel Siciliano, the most feared Mafia boss in Chicago. And what he did next would change both their lives forever. It was just past midnight on a rain-soaked Tuesday when the neon lights of the Red Lantern Diner cast their crimson glow across the slick pavement. Inside, the air hung thick with cigarette smoke and hushed conversations. This wasn't the kind of place you stumbled into by accident. Everyone knew what the Red Lantern really was. Angel Siciliano's unofficial office, where the city's most dangerous deals were made over cold coffee and cheaper whiskey. Angel sat in his usual booth at the back, a wall of a man whose mere presence seemed to drain the oxygen from the room. At 48, he had built an empire on fear, respect, and ruthless efficiency. His tattooed knuckles rested on the table as he discussed territory lines with his 3 lieutenants. The conversation was clinical. Measured numbers, names, problems that needed permanent solutions. "The West Side collection is short again," Tony muttered, sliding a manila folder across the table. "3rd week in a row." Angel's dark eyes barely flickered. "Then make it the last week. You want us to..." "I want you to remind them what happens when people forget their obligations." Angel's voice was flat, emotionless. Permanently. This was how Angel had survived 3 decades in a business that buried most men before they turned 30. He operated by one unbreakable rule: never let emotion cloud judgment. Sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford. Caring about anything made you vulnerable. And vulnerable men didn't last long in his world. The diner's regulars understood the protocol. Don't stare at Angel's table. Don't eavesdrop. Don't even breathe too loud when he's conducting business. The waitress knew to refill his coffee without being asked. The cook knew to have his usual order ready. Everything ran like clockwork, night after night, year after year. Tommy, the youngest lieutenant, leaned forward. "What about the shipment coming through?" The door exploded inward with such violence that the bell above it shattered against the wall. Every conversation died instantly. Heads snapped toward the entrance. The waitress's hand trembled, nearly dropping her pot of coffee. Tommy reached instinctively for the gun under his jacket. Standing in the doorway, illuminated by the red neon and the rain-soaked streetlights behind her, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Her white dress was torn and filthy, dark stains spreading across the fabric stains that looked too much like blood. Her bare feet left wet prints on the checkered linoleum. Her dark hair hung in tangled, rain-soaked strands around a face marked with fresh bruises. Tears mixed with blood and rainwater streaked down her cheeks. She stood there trembling, her chest heaving with panicked breaths, her wide eyes scanning the room with the desperate look of a hunted animal. And then those terrified eyes locked onto Angel Siciliano. Without hesitation, without fear of the most dangerous man in the city, she ran straight toward him. Her small legs carried her past shocked customers, past the frozen waitress, past everything that should have stopped her. She didn't stop until she reached Angel's booth, her tiny hands grabbing fistfuls of his leather jacket, clinging to him like he was the only thing standing between her and death itself. "Please," she sobbed, her voice breaking with each word. "Please don't let him take me. He's not my dad. He's not my dad." The diner erupted in gasps. A woman at the counter covered her mouth. 2 men in the corner booth stared in disbelief. Angel's lieutenants exchanged shocked glances in 15 years. They had never seen anyone approach their boss like this. Angel remained perfectly still, looking down at this trembling child who had just shattered years of careful routine. Her small fingers gripped his jacket so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Blood from her face was smearing onto his leather. She was shaking so hard he could feel it through his chest. But what froze everyone's blood wasn't just the child or her desperate plea. It was the man standing outside the diner window. Tall, heavy-set, arms crossed, watching the little girl with the cold expression of someone who'd come to collect property. The child felt Angel's attention shift. She pressed harder against him, her voice barely a whisper. "Please. He hurt my aunt. He tried to take me. Please don't let him." Angel's jaw tightened. His eyes moved slowly from the girl to the man outside, then to his lieutenants. Tony's hand was already under his jacket. Tommy had shifted position, ready to move. For 3 seconds, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then slowly, so slowly that every person in that diner felt the weight of it, Angel Siciliano rose from his seat. The little girl didn't let go. Her hands stayed locked on his jacket, her face buried against his side. And in that moment, something ancient and buried inside the city's most feared mafia boss began to crack open. Something he thought he'd killed 30 years ago. Something dangerous. Something that looked almost like compassion. The man outside pushed through the diner door, and Angel felt the child's grip tighten on his jacket. Rain dripped from the stranger's coat onto the checkered floor as he stepped inside, his eyes fixed on the trembling girl pressed against Angel's side. "There you are, sweetheart," the man said, his voice sickeningly sweet. "Uncle's been looking everywhere for you. Time to come home now." The girl whimpered and buried her face deeper into Angel's jacket. "He's lying," she whispered. "He's not my uncle. Please." Angel's 3 lieutenants had already risen from their seats, forming a subtle barrier. Tommy's hand remained under his jacket. Tony had moved to block the door. The third man, Rico, stood ready near the counter. The other customers seemed to shrink into their booths, suddenly very interested in their coffee cups. The stranger took another step forward, offering a nervous smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Look, I don't want any trouble here." The kid's confused. "Her aunt, my sister, she sent me to pick her up. Family business, you understand." Angel studied the man with the cold precision that had kept him alive for 3 decades. The way his eyes kept darting to the exit, the fresh scratches on his neck, the slight tremor in his hands, the brand mark barely visible above his collar, a symbol Angel had seen before. Years ago, connected to operations he'd thought were long dead. "What's your name?" Angel's voice was quiet, almost conversational, but everyone in the diner felt the threat behind it. "Frank. Frank Delaney." The man shifted his weight. "Look, I don't know who you are, but this is a family matter. The kid needs to come with me." "He hit my aunt," the girl suddenly blurted out, her voice muffled against Angel's side. "He hit her and she fell down and there was blood and she wouldn't wake up and he grabbed me and I ran and..." Her words dissolved into sobs. Frank's face twitched. "She's making things up. Kids do that when they're scared. Her aunt had an accident, that's all. I'm just trying to get her somewhere safe." Angel looked down at the child clinging to him. Her small body was trembling so violently he could feel it through his leather jacket. Blood stained the collar of her torn dress. Fresh bruises marked her arms where someone had grabbed her hard enough to leave fingerprints. And her eyes, those terrified, desperate eyes, held a truth that no amount of lies could cover. Something twisted in Angel's chest. Something he hadn't felt in 30 years. A memory of another little girl. Another pair of frightened eyes. Another moment when he'd failed to act fast enough. "Sit down," Angel said softly. Frank blinked. "What?" I said sit down. Angel's voice remained quiet, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Right there. That booth by the window. Now wait, just a..." Tony moved forward, his jacket falling open just enough to reveal the weapon beneath. The man said sit down. Frank's nervous smile vanished. He glanced at the door, but Rico was already blocking it. Arms crossed, expression blank. The other customers had turned away completely, suddenly fascinated by the rain outside or the patterns in their coffee. Frank sat. Angel gently tried to loosen the girl's grip on his jacket, but she held on tighter, shaking her head frantically. "It's okay," he heard himself say, and the gentleness in his own voice surprised him. "I'm not going anywhere. I just need you to tell me what happened." The girl looked up at him with those wide, terrified eyes. Up close, he could see she couldn't be more than 7. The same age Lucia had been, the same dark hair, the same look of absolute terror that still haunted his nightmares. "What's your name?" Angel asked. Peggy," she whispered. "Peggy Hash." "Okay, Peggy. I need you to be brave for me. Can you do that?" She nodded, though her chin trembled. "Tell me what happened tonight. Start from the beginning." Peggy's words came out in a rush, broken by hiccups and sobs. She lived with her aunt in an apartment on the south side. Tonight, she'd been coloring in her room when she heard shouting, men's voices. Her aunt screaming. She'd hidden in her closet, But through the crack in the door, she saw them 3 men, including Frank. They were yelling at her aunt about something she'd seen, something she'd told someone. Her aunt was crying, begging them to leave. Then Frank had hit her. Hard. Her aunt fell and didn't get up. The men started arguing about what to do. One of them noticed Peggy's drawings on the kitchen table. They realized she was home. Frank came looking for her. She ran, squeezing through her bedroom window onto the fire escape while they searched the apartment. She ran through streets she didn't know, barefoot, terrified, until she saw the red lights of the diner and burst through the door. "I didn't know where to go," Peggy whispered. "But I saw you, and you looked strong, like nobody could hurt you. So I thought, maybe—" Her voice broke. "Maybe you could help me." Angel's jaw tightened. He looked at Frank, who had gone pale, his earlier confidence evaporating. Then he looked at the mark on Frank's neck again, that symbol he recognized from decades ago, from operations run by men he'd once called brothers before they'd broken away to build their own brutal empire, Victor Datillo's empire. And suddenly, Angel understood. This wasn't random. This was organized. This was trafficking. This child had been targeted, just like Lucia. His hands curled into fists. Angel's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Tony, take our guest to the back room. Make sure he's comfortable." Frank lurched forward in his seat. "Now, hold on. And make sure he doesn't go anywhere." Angel's eyes never left the man's face. "We're going to have a longer conversation later." Tony moved swiftly, grabbing Frank by the collar and hauling him toward the kitchen. Frank's protests died the moment he saw the expression on Tony's face. The kitchen door swung shut behind them, and the muffled sounds of struggle quickly ceased. Angel knelt down to Peggy's level, ignoring the shocked stares from the remaining customers. "Where does your aunt live?" Peggy rattled off an address on the south side, her voice small and shaky. Angel recognized the neighborhood rundown, forgotten, the kind of place where screams went unheard and questions went unasked. "Rico, bring the car around back. Tommy, you're with me." Angel stood, and Peggy's hands immediately locked onto his jacket again. He looked down at her tear-streaked face. "We're going to check on your aunt, okay? But you're staying with me. Nobody's taking you anywhere." The drive through Chicago's rain-slicked streets was silent, except for Peggy's occasional sniffles. She sat pressed against Angel in the back seat, her small hand gripping 2 of his fingers. He found himself careful not to move too quickly, not to pull away. He couldn't remember the last time he'd touched another human being with anything resembling gentleness. The apartment building was exactly what Angel expected: crumbling brick, broken windows, flickering hallway lights that barely fought off the darkness. The front door hung crooked on its hinges. No security, no cameras. The perfect place for bad things to happen to forgotten people. "3rd floor," Peggy whispered. "Apartment 12. They climbed the stairs in formation, Tommy first, then Angel with Peggy, Rico bringing up the rear. The hallway smelled of mildew and desperation. Angel could hear a television blaring behind one door, a baby crying behind another. Nobody looked out. Nobody ever looked out in neighborhoods like this. The door to apartment 12 stood ajar. Tommy pushed it open with his foot, weapon drawn. Angel felt Peggy tense against him. "Stay right here with Rico," he told her gently. "Don't come in until I say." For the first time, she let go of his jacket. The apartment was small, just a living room, kitchen, bathroom, and bedroom visible through open doors. But it had been torn apart. Furniture overturned, drawers pulled out and dumped, pictures ripped from walls, books scattered across the floor, and blood. A dark stain spread across the worn carpet near the overturned coffee table. Angel stepped carefully through the debris, his trained eyes cataloging everything. This wasn't a random attack. This was a search. They'd been looking for something. "Boss," Tommy called from the bedroom. "In here." Angel found Peggy's aunt lying unconscious on the bedroom floor, curled on her side. She was breathing shallow, ragged breaths, but alive. A nasty gash above her eyebrow had bled down the side of her face. Her lip was split. Bruises were already forming on her jaw and neck. "Call my doctor," Angel ordered. "Tell him it's an emergency. I want him at the safe house in 20 minutes. He knelt beside the woman, checking her pulse. Steady, if weak. She was younger than he'd expected, probably early 30s. Dark hair like Peggy's. The family resemblance was unmistakable. A small sound made him turn. Peggy stood in the doorway despite his instructions, Rico behind her looking apologetic. The girl's face had gone white. "Aunt Maggie," she whispered, and started forward. Angel caught her gently. "She's alive, Peggy. She's hurt, but she's alive. We're going to take her somewhere safe, somewhere doctors can help her. Is she going to die? Peggy's voice cracked on the last word. No. Angel surprised himself with the certainty in his voice. I promise you, she's not going to die. He didn't make promises. Promises were liabilities. But looking into this child's terrified eyes, he found he couldn't stop himself. Tommy had already called for the doctor and was now searching the apartment. Boss, they tossed this place good. Took anything valuable, but look at this. He held up a notebook, pages filled with neat handwriting. Names, dates, license plates. She was documenting something. Angel took the notebook, flipping through pages. His jaw tightened as he recognized patterns. Drop-off times, vehicle descriptions, the same locations repeated. Routes, schedules. This wasn't random observation. Peggy's aunt had been tracking something specific. She'd been tracking a trafficking operation, and she'd been stupid enough to think she could report it. They knew, Angel said quietly. She saw something. Documented it. Probably tried to report it to police. Word got back to whoever's running this operation. Datillo? Tommy asked. Angel nodded slowly. The symbol on Frank's neck. The organized nature of the attack. The trafficking patterns in the notebook. It all pointed to Victor Datillo, the man Angel had once trusted. The man who'd broken away years ago to build his own empire on the backs of the vulnerable. Get her downstairs carefully, Angel ordered. Tommy, you drive them to the safe house. Rico, you stay here and clean this scene. I don't want anyone knowing where she went. What about you, boss? Angel looked down at Peggy, who was staring at her unconscious aunt with tears streaming down her face. I'm staying with Peggy. The girl's hand found his again, gripping tight. As Tommy and Rico carefully lifted Aunt Maggie onto a makeshift stretcher, Angel felt something he hadn't felt in 3 decades. The weight of responsibility for someone other than himself, the fear of failing again. He looked at his hands scarred, tattooed, stained with 30 years of violence, and wrapped in those brutal hands was the small, trembling hand of a 7-year-old girl who'd chosen to trust the most dangerous man in Chicago. Angel had spent 30 years building walls around whatever remained of his heart. Tonight, a little girl named Peggy Hash had walked straight through them. The safe house was a 2-story brick building in a quiet neighborhood where Angel's organization kept people who needed protection or persuasion. Tonight, it would serve the former purpose. Tommy pulled the car into the attached garage, and Rico immediately sealed the entrance behind them. Angel's doctor arrived within minutes. A gray-haired man named Vincent, who'd patched up more bullet wounds than he cared to count and knew better than to ask questions. He examined Aunt Maggie on the living room couch while Peggy sat rigidly beside Angel, her hand still locked around his fingers. Concussion, Vincent announced after his examination. Severe bruising to the ribs, possible fracture. The head wound looks worse than it is, but she needs rest. No permanent damage as far as I can tell. But she'll be in considerable pain when she wakes up. When will that be? Peggy's voice was barely audible. Vincent's expression softened. Could be hours, sweetheart. Could be tomorrow morning. Her body needs time to heal. But she will wake up? Peggy pressed. She will. Vincent packed his supplies. I'll leave medication for the pain and check on her tomorrow. After Vincent left, Angel posted guards outside 2 men he trusted with his life. Inside, the safe house fell into an uneasy quiet. Tommy stood by the window. Rico checked the perimeter, and Angel sat in an armchair, still holding Peggy's hand, unsure how he'd arrived at this moment. The girl hadn't left his side since the diner. Even now, she sat on the floor beside his chair, leaning against his leg, her eyes fixed on her aunt's unconscious form. You should eat something, Angel said. The words felt foreign in his mouth. How long had it been since he'd cared whether someone ate? Peggy shook her head. When's the last time you had food? Breakfast. Her voice was small. Aunt Maggie made pancakes. She always makes pancakes on Tuesdays. Angel looked at Tommy and jerked his head toward the kitchen. His lieutenant disappeared and returned minutes later with a sandwich and a glass of milk. Peggy stared at the food like she'd forgotten what it was for. Eat, Angel said, more gently than he'd intended. Your aunt's going to need you strong when she wakes up. That logic seemed to reach her. Peggy picked up the sandwich with trembling hands and took small, mechanical bites. Angel watched her, this tiny girl with blood still dried in her hair, forcing herself to eat because he'd told her to. The trust was overwhelming, terrifying. Can I ask you something? Peggy said after finishing half the sandwich. Go ahead. Why are you helping me? Her dark eyes met his. Everyone in that diner looked scared of you. Even the bad man was scared. So why did you help me? Angel was quiet for a long moment. How did you explain 30 years of guilt to a 7-year-old? How did you tell her that she reminded you of every failure you'd ever tried to bury? I had a sister once, he heard himself say. Her name was Lucia. She was about your age. Where is she now? I don't know. The words tasted like ash. Bad men took her a long time ago. I never found her. Peggy's eyes widened. Never? Angel shook his head. I've looked for 30 years. I'll probably look for 30 more. Is that why you saved me? Because of your sister? Maybe. Angel looked at Aunt Maggie's still form. Or maybe I'm tired of bad men hurting people who can't fight back. Peggy considered this, then leaned her head against his knee. I'm glad I picked you. Something tightened in Angel's chest. Around midnight, Peggy finally fell asleep, curled up on the couch opposite her aunt. A blanket Tommy had found tucked around her small form. Angel watched her chest rise and fall, her face finally peaceful despite the bruises. He moved to the kitchen where Tommy was making coffee. His lieutenant poured 2 cups without being asked. Boss, what are we doing here? Tommy kept his voice low. I get it, the kid needed help. But this isn't our business. This is police business. Police can't protect them. Angel sipped the bitter coffee. Frank already admitted he's connected to something bigger. The notebook proves Aunt Maggie was tracking an operation. You think the cops can handle that? So we handle it? We investigate. Angel's voice hardened. I want to know everything. Who sent Frank? Who he works for? What operation they're running? Every name, every location, every detail. You think it's Datillo? I know it's Datillo. Angel's knuckles whitened around the coffee cup. The brand on Frank's neck, that's his mark. Same one his crew used years ago when he broke away. He's running the same operations we shut down back then. Just bigger now. Smarter. If we go after Datillo, that's war. He's got territory, connections, protection. The other families won't like us disrupting business. I don't care what they like. Angel's eyes were cold. That little girl in there ran through the streets bleeding and barefoot because Datillo's men tried to kidnap her. Her aunt is unconscious because she tried to stop them. How many others, Tommy? How many other kids didn't make it to a diner? Didn't find someone to help them? Tommy was quiet. In 15 years of working for Angel Siciliano, he'd never heard emotion in his boss's voice. Not once. But tonight, there was something raw and dangerous beneath the words. I want Frank in the interrogation room tomorrow morning, Angel continued. And I want him ready to talk. Use whatever methods necessary. Boss, are you sure about this? Once we start, I'm sure. Angel looked through the doorway at Peggy's sleeping form. Find out who else was at that apartment. Get descriptions. Pull every resource we have. I want names by morning. As Tommy left to make calls, Angel stood alone in the kitchen, gripping his coffee cup hard enough to crack. 30 years ago, he'd failed to protect Lucia. He wouldn't fail again. Not this time. Not this little girl. Dawn broke gray and cold over Chicago. Angel hadn't slept. He'd spent the night in the armchair, watching Peggy and her aunt breathe, making sure they were safe, making sure they were real. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lucia's face, heard her voice calling for him, felt the weight of 30 years of failure pressing down on his chest. Peggy stirred first, sitting up with a small gasp, disoriented until her eyes found her aunt. Then she looked at Angel, and something in her small face relaxed. You stayed, she whispered. I said I would. Adults don't always do what they say. Angel had no response to that. In his world, words were cheap, and loyalty was bought. But looking at this child who'd learned too young not to trust promises, he felt something ancient and painful shift in his chest. Aunt Maggie woke an hour later with a groan. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused, before landing on Peggy. Baby? Her voice was hoarse, broken. Peggy? Oh God, Peggy. Peggy scrambled to her side, grabbing her aunt's hand. I'm okay, Aunt Maggie, I'm okay, he helped us. Maggie's gaze shifted to Angel, and fear immediately flooded her eyes. She tried to sit up, wincing at the pain, instinctively pulling Peggy behind her despite her injuries. It's okay, Peggy said quickly. He's not like them. He saved me. But Maggie's eyes remained fixed on Angel's tattooed knuckles, his cold expression, the dangerous aura that clung to him like smoke. She knew what he was. People like her always knew. Angel stood slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. Your niece ran into my diner last night. Said someone attacked you. Tried to take her. Where? Maggie's voice cracked. Where are we? Somewhere safe. My doctor treated you. You have a concussion and bruised ribs. You need rest. I need to call the police. The police can't help you. Angel's voice was flat. The men who came for Peggy are connected to an organization the police can't touch. You tried reporting them already, didn't you? That's why they came. Maggie's face went pale. Her silence was answer enough. I found your notebook, Angel continued. The one with names and dates and license plates. You've been watching them, documenting their routes, their schedules. You saw something you shouldn't have. Tears filled Maggie's eyes. I work at the diner on 5th Street. Night shifts. 3 weeks ago, I saw them. A van pulls up every Tuesday and Thursday around 2 a.m. They'd bring in children terrified, drugged, barely conscious. Load them into the back entrance of the warehouse across the street. I watched it happen 6 times before She swallowed hard. Before I tried to report it. To who? Police, social services, anyone who would listen. Her voice broke. Nobody cared. They said I was imagining things, that I had no proof. One officer even told me to mind my business if I knew what was good for me. Angel's jaw tightened. Dattilo had cops on his payroll. Of course he did. So I started documenting everything, Maggie continued. Taking photos, writing down details. I thought if I had enough evidence, they'd have to listen. But somehow they found out. Last night, 3 men broke into my apartment. They said if I didn't give them the photos and destroy the notebook, they'd... She looked at Peggy, her voice dropping to a whisper. They'd take her instead. Teach me what happens to people who interfere. The photos, Angel said. Where are they? Hidden, behind a loose brick in the bathroom wall. Angel nodded to Tommy, who immediately left to retrieve them. Maggie watched him go, then turned back to Angel with desperate eyes. Please, she whispered. I know what you are. I know what you do. But Peggy, she's innocent. She's all I have. If you want money, I don't have much, but I don't want your money. Angel's voice was quiet but firm. I want information. Everything you know about that operation. Every detail. Every face. Every time. Every location. Why? What are you going to do? Angel met her gaze. What the police won't. What they can't. Maggie stared at him for a long moment, reading something in his expression. Then slowly, painfully, she began to talk. She described the warehouse on 5th Street, the white van with tinted windows and scratched paint on the passenger door, the 3 men she'd seen regularly, one tall and thin, one shorter with a limp, and Frank, the one who'd attacked her. She described the children, never the same ones twice, always different ages, always terrified. She talked about overhearing phone calls, catching fragments of conversations about shipments and buyers, and routes to the south side. Angel listened to every word, his expression growing colder with each detail. This wasn't small time. This was organized, systematic, professional. This was Dattilo's signature work, the same operations he'd run before Angel had driven him out years ago. But he'd rebuilt, expanded, and now he was trafficking children through Chicago like they were cargo. When Maggie finished, her voice was raw and her face was wet with tears. Peggy had climbed back onto the couch, pressing against her aunt's side. There's something else, Maggie said quietly. The night before they attacked me, I saw one of the men arguing on the phone. He kept saying a name, Victor, kept saying, Victor wants this handled, and Victor doesn't tolerate mistakes. Angel's hands curled into fists. Victor Dattilo, the man he'd once called brother, the man who'd betrayed everything they'd stood for, the man who was now trafficking children through the same city Angel controlled. Tommy returned with the photos, grainy but clear enough. Children's faces, the van, the warehouse entrance, timestamps on the backs in Maggie's careful handwriting. Angel looked at those photos and saw Lucia in every terrified face. You and Peggy stay here, he said finally. You're under my protection now. No one touches you. No one even looks at you wrong. Understood? Maggie nodded, too exhausted to argue. As Angel turned to leave, Peggy's voice stopped him. Are you going to find the bad men? He looked back at her small, hopeful face. Yes. All of them? Every single one. Peggy's grip tightened on her aunt's hand. Promise? Angel had stopped making promises 30 years ago. But looking into those eyes that reminded him so much of Lucia's, he heard himself say, I promise. The basement of Angel's primary operation was soundproof for a reason. Frank was already there when Angel arrived, zip-tied to a metal chair, his earlier confidence long gone, sweat beaded on his forehead. His eyes darted between Angel's approaching form and the door, as if calculating escapes that didn't exist. Angel didn't say anything at first. He simply circled Frank slowly, letting the silence stretch and tighten like a noose. Tommy and Rico stood by the door, arms crossed, expressions blank. "I want a lawyer," Frank finally said, his voice cracking. "You can't just—" Angel's fist connected with Frank's jaw so fast the man didn't see it coming. The chair rocked backward, and Frank's head snapped to the side. Blood filled his mouth. "No lawyers down here," Angel said quietly. "No police. No rules. Just you and me and the truth." Frank spat blood onto the concrete floor. "I don't know what you want from me. Start with your name. Your real name. I told you. Frank Delaney." Angel nodded to Rico, who pulled out a folder and tossed it onto Frank's lap. Photos spilled out Frank entering known Datillo locations. Frank with other men bearing the same brand. Frank loading boxes into vehicles at 3 a.m. "Frank Delaney died 6 years ago in a car accident in Ohio," Angel said. "You're Frank Morrison. You work for Victor Datillo. You've been working for him for 8 years. Want to try again?" Frank's face went pale. "Here's what I know," Angel continued, his voice dangerously calm. "You and 2 others broke into Margaret Hash's apartment last night. You assaulted her. You attempted to kidnap her 7-year-old niece. You're part of a trafficking operation that moves children through the South Side every Tuesday and Thursday. What I don't know yet is how big this operation is and where those children end up. I want a deal," Frank said quickly. "Protection. Witness protection. I'll tell you everything, but I need guarantees. You're not in a position to negotiate. You don't understand." Frank's voice rose with panic. "Victor will kill me. He'll kill my family. He has people everywhere, cops, judges, politicians. You can't protect me from him." Angel leaned in close, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Victor Datillo is a dead man. He just doesn't know it yet. The only question is whether you die with him, or whether you help me end this and maybe I let you walk away with your life." Frank's resistance crumbled. Words poured out of him like water from a broken dam. The operation was bigger than Angel had imagined. Datillo had been building it for years, quietly, carefully. He moved children from vulnerable families, runaways, kids from broken homes, children whose disappearances wouldn't trigger investigations. The warehouse on 5th Street was just one of 7 locations across the city. They held the children there for 24 to 48 hours before moving them again. Always at night, always in unmarked vehicles. "Where do they go?" Angel's voice was ice. "Different places. Some go south, across state lines. Some go to private buyers. Rich people who—" Frank swallowed hard. "Who pay a lot of money for specific types of kids." Angel's hands tightened into fists. Tommy shifted uncomfortably by the door. Even Rico, who'd seen the worst of what humanity could offer, looked sick. "The girl," Angel said. "Peggy. Why her specifically?" "Her aunt saw too much. Victor wanted to send a message: you interfere with business. We take what matters most to you." Peggy was supposed to disappear. Her aunt was supposed to live with that loss for the rest of her life. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "How many children?" Angel asked. "I don't know exact numbers. Dozens. Maybe more." "How many of Victor's men? In the trafficking operation?" "Maybe 20 directly involved. But Victor has over 100 soldiers in his organization. Legitimate businesses as fronts. Connections to 3 other families. He's untouchable. Nobody's untouchable." Angel straightened. "Names. I want every name, every location, every buyer you know about, every route, every schedule, everything." Frank talked for 3 hours. Tommy recorded everything, filling page after page with names, addresses, times, patterns. The scope of Datillo's operation was staggering. He'd built an empire on stolen innocence, protected by corrupt officials, and funded by monsters who hid behind wealth and power. When Frank finally ran out of information, Angel stood and walked to the door. "What happens to me now?" Frank's voice trembled. Angel paused, looking back at this man who'd tried to kidnap a 7-year-old girl, who'd beaten a woman unconscious, who'd participated in the trafficking of dozens of children. "You stay here," Angel said. "When this is over, if you've told me the truth, I'll decide if you live or die. And if I lied?" Angel's expression was colder than Frank had ever seen. "Then dying will be the merciful option." Upstairs, in Angel's main office, Tommy spread maps across the desk. Red marks indicated Datillo's known locations. Blue marks showed the routes Frank had described. Yellow marks represented buyers and drop-off points. "This is bigger than just Datillo," Tommy said. "We take him down. We're starting a war with everyone connected to this network. Then we start a war. Angel studied the maps, his mind already calculating moves and countermoves. I want surveillance on all 7 warehouses. Round the clock. I want to know every person who comes and goes. I want vehicles followed, patterns documented, schedules confirmed. Boss, this is going to take resources, time. If we move too fast, children are being moved through our city every Tuesday and Thursday. Angel's voice was quiet but absolute. While we plan and prepare, more kids disappear, more families destroyed, more Peggies running through streets looking for someone to save them. He looked at the photos Maggie had taken, spread across his desk. Young faces frozen in terror. And suddenly he was 14 again, watching police tell his parents they'd found no trace of Lucia, watching his mother collapse, watching his father turn to stone, feeling his own heart shatter and reform into something harder, colder, capable of surviving the unsurvivable. He'd failed Lucia. He'd failed his parents. He'd failed himself. But he wouldn't fail Peggy. Or the others. Not this time. We move fast, Angel said. We move hard. And we don't stop until every last one of them is gone. Tommy nodded slowly. When do we start? Angel looked at his scarred, tattooed hands. Hands that had killed, that had hurt, that had done terrible things in the name of survival and power. Maybe, for once, those hands could do something right. Tonight, he said. We start tonight. The photograph was old, creased and faded from being folded and unfolded 1,000 times. Angel kept it in his wallet, tucked behind everything else where he wouldn't have to see it unless he chose to. But tonight, alone in his office at 3 a.m, he pulled it out and stared at the little girl smiling back at him. Lucia, 8 years old, dark hair and pigtails, gap-toothed grin. She was holding a stuffed rabbit she'd named Mr. Whiskers, wearing the yellow dress their mother had made for her birthday. This photo was taken 2 weeks before she vanished. Angel was 14 when it happened, old enough to remember everything, young enough to believe he could have stopped it. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Their mother had sent Angel to the corner store for milk. Lucia had begged to come along, but he'd said no, told her she was too slow, that she'd just get in the way. He'd left her sitting on their front steps, playing with Mr. Whiskers. When he came back 20 minutes later, the steps were empty. The rabbit lay on the ground, one ear torn. Lucia was gone. The police searched for months. His parents spent every penny they had hiring private investigators. His father put up posters across 3 states. His mother stopped sleeping, stopped eating, became a ghost herself. They never found her. Not a body, not a witness, not a single trace. Just gone, like she'd never existed at all. Angel's father died of a heart attack 2 years later. The doctors called it natural causes, but Angel knew better. His father had died of a broken heart, of guilt, of the weight of failing to protect his little girl. His mother lasted another 5 years before she followed. Cancer, officially. But Angel believed she'd simply stopped wanting to live in a world without Lucia. And Angel? He'd survived by becoming something else entirely. Something hard, something cold, something that couldn't be hurt because it refused to feel anything at all. He built walls around the part of him that had loved his sister. Brick by brick, body by body, he constructed an empire on the foundation of that loss. He became the kind of man who could make hard decisions without hesitation, who could order deaths without remorse, who could look at suffering and remain unmoved. For 30 years, those walls had held. Then Peggy Hash ran into his diner, grabbed his jacket, and looked up at him with Lucia's terrified eyes. And suddenly, Angel was 14 again, standing on empty front steps, holding a torn stuffed rabbit, screaming his sister's name into the uncaring afternoon. He'd failed once. The guilt had poisoned 3 decades of his life. He couldn't fail again. Angel folded the photograph carefully and returned it to his wallet. Then he stood, grabbed his coat, and headed for the safe house. He needed to see Peggy. Needed to confirm she was real, safe, still breathing. The guards at the safe house nodded as he entered. Inside, the living room was dark, except for a small lamp in the corner. Aunt Maggie was asleep on one couch, her breathing steady but pained, and on the other couch, curled under a blanket, was Peggy. She wasn't asleep. "Can't sleep?" Angel asked quietly. Peggy shook her head. "Every time I close my eyes, I see him. Frank, I see him hitting Aunt Maggie. I see the blood. I see..." Her voice broke. Angel sat down in the armchair across from her. "I know what that's like. You have nightmares too." "Every night for 30 years. Peggy studied him with those 2 old eyes. Is that why you're helping us? Because of your nightmares? Maybe. Angel was quiet for a moment. When I was your age, I had a little sister, Lucia. She was 8. One day, she disappeared. Bad men took her, and I never saw her again. Peggy sat up slowly. Never? Never. I've looked for her my whole life. Part of me is still looking. I'm sorry. Peggy's voice was small. That's really sad. It is. Angel met her gaze. But you know what's sadder? That I could have stopped it. I was supposed to watch her that day. I left her alone for 20 minutes. 20 minutes. And she was gone. That's not your fault, isn't it? Angel's voice was rough. I was her big brother. I was supposed to protect her. That's what big brothers do. But I failed, and she paid the price. Peggy was quiet for a long moment. Then she climbed off the couch and walked over to Angel. Without hesitation, she climbed into his lap and wrapped her small arms around his neck. Angel froze. Nobody had hugged him in 30 years. He'd forgotten what it felt like. You didn't fail, Peggy whispered against his shoulder. You were just a kid. Kids can't stop bad men. But you're not a kid anymore. And you're stopping them now. You're saving me. You're saving other kids too. That's what Lucia would want, right? Something cracked in Angel's chest. Something that had been frozen solid for 3 decades suddenly shifted, warmed, broke open. His arms came up slowly, awkwardly, and wrapped around Peggy's small frame. She felt impossibly fragile, like she might break if he held too tight. But she didn't pull away. She just held on. This tiny girl who'd somehow seen past his walls and found the broken boy still hiding inside. Don't let go, Peggy whispered. Please don't let go. I won't, Angel heard himself say. I promise I won't. They sat like that for a long time. A feared mafia boss and a traumatized little girl, holding on to each other in the darkness like they were the only solid things left in the world. Eventually, Peggy fell asleep in his arms. Angel should have put her back on the couch, but he couldn't bring himself to move, so he just sat there, this child steady breathing against his chest, and felt something he hadn't felt since he was 14 years old. Hope. Maybe he couldn't save Lucia. Maybe that chance was lost forever. But he could save Peggy. He could stop Datilo. He could tear down this trafficking network brick by brick and make sure no other little girls had to run through streets barefoot and terrified, looking for anyone to help them. When dawn broke, Peggy stirred and looked up at him with sleepy eyes. You stayed all night. I said I would. Most people don't mean it when they say things like that. I'm not most people. Peggy smiled a small, genuine smile that transformed her bruised face. I know. That's why I picked you. As Angel carefully set her back on the couch and tucked the blanket around her, he realized something profound. For 30 years, he'd believed Lucia's disappearance had destroyed him, turned him into something cold and inhuman, a monster wearing a man's face. But maybe it hadn't destroyed him. Maybe it had just been waiting for the right moment, the right person, the right reason to remember what it meant to be human. Peggy Hash had given him that reason. And Angel Siciliano, the most feared mafia boss in Chicago, the man who'd spent 3 decades building an empire on violence and fear, finally understood what he'd been missing all along. Purpose. Not the kind that came from power or money or respect. The kind that came from protecting someone who couldn't protect themselves. The kind that came from choosing, for once in his violent life, to be someone's hero instead of their nightmare. As he left the safe house and climbed into his car, Angel looked at himself in the rearview mirror. The same scarred face stared back, the same cold eyes, the same tattooed throat. But something behind those eyes had changed. For the first time in 30 years, Angel Siciliano felt alive, and Victor Datilo had no idea what was coming for him. The war room in Angel's main facility looked like something from a military operation. 3 tables pushed together, covered in maps, photographs, documents, and surveillance equipment. Rico had set up monitors showing live feeds from 6 of Datilo's 7 warehouses. Tommy was on his 4th pot of coffee, coordinating teams across the city. Angel stood at the head of the table, studying the network they'd mapped out over the past 72 hours. Red strings connected locations to names, names to vehicles, vehicles to routes. It was comprehensive, damning, and horrifying in its scope. Status, Angel said. Tommy stepped forward, exhaustion evident in his eyes. Surveillance confirmed Frank's information. Tuesday and Thursday nights, like clockwork. White van arrives at the 5th Street warehouse around 2 a.m., stays for 30 to 40 minutes, then leaves heading south. We tracked it to a secondary location in the industrial district. How many children? Last Tuesday, 4. Thursday, 3. All under 12 years old. Tommy's jaw tightened. Boss, watching those kids being unloaded, it took everything I had not to. I know. Angel's voice was steel. Soon. What else? Rico pulled up photos on one of the monitors. We identified 8 of Datillo's key players. These 4 handle transportation. He pointed to faces on the screen. These 2 manage the warehouses. And these 2 are his lieutenants. They run the operation directly under Victor. The buyers? Harder to track. Frank gave us 3 names. We confirmed 2 are legitimate or legitimate-looking. Businessmen. One owns a chain of hotels. The other is in real estate. Both have more money than God and connections to every level of city government. Angel studied their faces. Normal-looking men, the kind you'd pass on the street without a second glance. The kind who hid their monstrosity behind expensive suits and charitable donations. What about police involvement? Angel asked. Tommy pulled out another set of files. At least 6 cops on Datillo's payroll. 2 detectives, 3 patrol officers, 1 sergeant. They feed him information about investigations, tip him off about raids, make sure complaints disappear. Names? Tommy rattled them off. Angel memorized each one. Dirty cops were worse than criminals. They betrayed the badge, the trust, everything they were supposed to protect. Evidence? Angel asked. Maggie's photos are a start, but they're not enough for prosecution. We need more. Frank's testimony would help, but he's terrified. Says he'll be killed before he can testify. He's probably right. Angel moved to the map showing Datillo's territory. We're not building a legal case. We're dismantling an empire. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what that meant. Boss, Rico said carefully, if we go after Datillo directly, we're starting a war. Not just with him, but with everyone connected to his operation. Other families will get involved. The cops on his payroll will come after us. This could tear the city apart. The city is already torn apart, Angel said quietly. We're just the only ones who see it. Children are being bought and sold like merchandise while everyone looks the other way. That ends now. How do you want to play this? Tommy asked. Angel studied the map for a long moment, his mind calculating moves and countermoves like a chess master planning an endgame. Datillo was smart, paranoid, well-protected. A direct assault would fail. But Angel hadn't survived 30 years by being predictable. We hit them systematically, Angel said. Take down the operation piece by piece. First, we cut off their supply lines. No transportation, no operation. The drivers? Find them. Convince them to stop working for Victor. Money, threats, whatever it takes. The ones who won't listen. Angel's expression hardened. Remove them. Rico nodded, making notes. Second, the warehouses. We can't raid them directly. Too much risk of alerting Victor. But we can make them unusable. Fires, structural damage, code violations that force them to shut down. Make it look like accidents. That'll slow them down, Tommy said. But it won't stop them. It doesn't have to stop them. It has to make them panic, make them sloppy. Force Victor to move his operation somewhere we can track it. Angel pointed to the Southside Industrial District. This is where they're most vulnerable, the secondary holding facility. It's isolated, minimal security, and Frank says Victor rarely visits it personally. You want to hit it? I want to empty it. Every child in that facility gets out. Then we burn it to the ground. The room was silent. What Angel was proposing wasn't just illegal, it was an act of war that would have consequences none of them could fully predict. When? Rico asked. Tomorrow night. Thursday. When they're expecting a new shipment. Angel's eyes were cold. Instead of delivering children, Victor's going to find an empty building and a message he can't ignore. What message? Angel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, that I'm coming for him. And nothing, not his money, not his connections, not his army is going to stop me. Tommy and Rico exchanged glances. They'd known Angel for years, had seen him angry, had seen him ruthless. But this was different. This was personal. This was a man with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. We'll need at least 20 men, Tommy said. Armed, trained, ready for anything. Get them. I want our best people. Nobody talks about this outside this room. Security is absolute. As his men left to prepare, Angel returned to studying the photographs of Datillo's operation. Somewhere in this network of evil, Victor Datillo sat comfortable and protected, believing himself untouchable, believing his empire was secure. He had no idea that Angel Siciliano, the man he'd once called brother, the man he'd betrayed years ago, was about to burn that empire to the ground. Angel's phone rang. The safe house. Boss, the guard said. The little girl is asking for you. She won't eat, won't sleep, just keeps asking when you're coming back. Something softened in Angel's expression. Tell her I'll be there in an hour. He hung up and looked at Lucia's photograph one more time. Then he grabbed his coat and headed for the door. He had promises to keep, to the living and the dead. And Angel Siciliano had never broken a promise that mattered. Not anymore. The industrial district was a graveyard of forgotten buildings and broken dreams. The facility Dattilo used as his secondary holding location sat at the far end of a dead-end street, surrounded by empty warehouses and overgrown lots. No cameras, no witnesses. The perfect place for crimes nobody wanted to see. Angel sat in the back of a black SUV 2 blocks away, watching the feed from Rico's surveillance drone. 20 of his best men were positioned around the perimeter, invisible in the darkness. Tommy was with the entry team, checking weapons and reviewing the plan one final time. It was Thursday, just past midnight. The delivery was scheduled for 2 a.m. Movement. Rico's voice came through the earpiece. White van approaching from the north. Angel watched the screen as the van pulled up to the facility's loading dock. 2 men climbed out, both armed, both scanning the area nervously before opening the back doors. What they didn't know was that Angel's team had been inside the facility for 3 hours. Every guard had been quietly neutralized, every lock disabled, every exit secured. The facility was already theirs. The 2 men from the van walked to the loading dock door and knocked 3 quick raps, too slow. The signal. When no one answered, they knocked again. Louder this time. Now, Angel said quietly. The loading dock door rolled open, but instead of Dattilo's men, Tommy and 6 armed soldiers stood waiting. The 2 men from the van froze, hands moving toward weapons they'd never reach. Don't, Tommy said, his gun aimed center mass. Get on the ground. Now. They complied. Within seconds, they were zip-tied and blindfolded, loaded into one of Angel's vehicles. The van was driven away by Rico's team, disappearing into the night. Inside the facility, Angel's men worked quickly. The building had been divided into small rooms, each with a locked door. Behind those doors, they found 12 children, ages 5 to 13, some drugged, some crying, all terrified. Angel had brought medical personnel and social workers, people he trusted, people who owed him favors and wouldn't ask questions. They moved through the facility with practiced efficiency, checking each child, providing comfort, preparing them for transport. Angel walked through the facility himself, looking into each room, seeing the faces of children who'd been stolen from their lives. In one room, he found a little boy no older than 6, curled in the corner, clutching a stuffed bear. The boy looked up at Angel with eyes that had seen too much, and Angel saw Lucia, saw Peggy, saw every failure and every second chance. It's okay, Angel said, kneeling down. You're safe now. Nobody's going to hurt you anymore. The boy didn't speak, just stared with those haunted eyes. I'm taking you somewhere safe, Angel continued. There are people who are going to help you find your family. But first, I need you to be brave. Can you do that? Slowly, the boy nodded. Angel held out his hand. After a moment's hesitation, the boy took it. Outside, the children were loaded into unmarked vehicles. The social workers had been briefed. These children would be placed in protective custody, their identities kept confidential, their testimonies recorded but never forced. Angel had made arrangements with a federal prosecutor he trusted, one of the few who couldn't be bought. The legal battle would come later. Tonight was about rescue. As the last vehicle pulled away, carrying children toward safety, Angel stood in the empty facility with Tommy and Rico. Burn it, he said. Rico set the charges while Tommy made sure nothing remained that could be traced back to Angel's organization. 30 minutes later, they were 2 miles away when the facility exploded into flames. Fire trucks would come eventually. Police would investigate. But all they'd find would be ash and metal and the ghost of an operation that no longer existed. 1 down, 6 warehouses to go. Over the next 72 hours, Angel systematically dismantled Dattilo's empire. The transportation drivers found themselves unable to work, vehicles sabotaged. Some drivers bought off, others too terrified to continue after midnight visits from Angel's men. 2 more warehouses suffered electrical fires. Another was shut down by code enforcement after an anonymous tip revealed a dozen violations. Dattilo's operation began hemorrhaging money, resources, and security. And then Angel went after the buyers. The hotel owner woke to find his office filled with photographs, images of him with children, financial records showing payments to shell companies, evidence that would destroy him. Angel gave him a choice: Turn himself in or face public exposure and something far worse. The man chose prison. The real estate mogul wasn't as smart. He tried to run. Tommy found him at the airport with a bag of cash and a one-way ticket. He never made his flight. With each move, Angel sent the same message. The old order was over. The protection Dattilo provided was an illusion, and anyone involved in trafficking children would face consequences that transcended law or mercy. Dattilo finally broke his silence on the 7th day. He called Angel directly, his voice tight with rage. "You're making a mistake," Dattilo said. "You have no idea what you're starting." "I know exactly what I'm starting," Angel replied calmly. "I'm ending you. This city has rules, territories, agreements. You're breaking all of them. You broke them first when you started trafficking children through my city." "Your city?" Dattilo laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You really think you can win this? I have connections you can't touch, resources you can't imagine. I've built something bigger than both of us. You built it on stolen innocence, on destroyed families, on children who'll never be whole again." Angel's voice dropped to ice. "I'm going to tear it down brick by brick, and when there's nothing left, I'm coming for you." "Is that a threat?" "No, Victor. It's a promise." The line went dead. 2 days later, Angel received intel that Dattilo had called a meeting with his remaining lieutenants. The location, an abandoned shipyard on the waterfront. The time, midnight. It was a trap, obviously. Dattilo knew Angel would come. Probably had 50 men waiting. Probably had planned for every contingency. Angel went anyway. He brought 30 of his best soldiers, positioned them strategically around the shipyard, and walked into the meeting alone. Because this wasn't about tactics or territory anymore. This was about 2 men who'd once been brothers, who'd chosen different paths, who'd finally reached the point where only one could survive. Dattilo stood in the center of the shipyard, flanked by guards, illuminated by harsh floodlights. He looked older than Angel remembered, harder, but there was fear in his eyes, the fear of a man who knew his empire was crumbling. "You came," Dattilo said. "You called. I thought we could talk. End this before more people die. People are dying because of you, Victor. Children. Innocence. That ends tonight." "You self-righteous bastard." Dattilo's facade cracked. "You think you're better than me? You think your hands are clean? We came up together, Angel. We built this life together. You've killed more people than I can count. What makes you different?" "I never hurt children." "No, you just failed to protect them." Dattilo's smile was cruel. "I know about Lucia. Everyone knows. Your little sister. Vanished because you weren't paying attention. Is that what this is about? 30 years of guilt? Finally catching up to you?" Angel's hands clenched into fists, but his voice remained steady. "This is about stopping you before you destroy more families. Too late. My operation spans 5 states. You shut down Chicago? I rebuild somewhere else. You can't stop all of it. I can stop you." Dattilo pulled a gun. So did his guards. But Angel's men were faster. Laser sights appeared on every one of Dattilo's soldiers. The shipyard became a frozen tableau of lethal intent. "You're outgunned," Angel said quietly. "Your empire is gone. Your connections are running. Your protection has evaporated. You have nothing left, Victor. Nothing but the choice I'm giving you right now." "What choice?" "Turn yourself in. Testify against everyone involved. Give prosecutors everything they need to shut down your network permanently. Maybe you get protective custody. Maybe you live. And if I refuse?" Angel's expression was colder than Dattilo had ever seen. "Then you don't leave this shipyard." For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the wind off the water and the distant cry of gulls. Then Dattilo lowered his gun. "I'll give you the names," he said, his voice defeated. "All of them. Every buyer, every cop, every connection. But I want immunity. Full protection. That's not my call." "Then whose call is it?" "The federal prosecutor waiting in that car." Angel nodded toward the shipyard entrance, where headlights had just appeared. "She's prepared to offer a deal. Whether you take it is up to you." Dattilo stared at Angel with something like hatred and something like respect. "You've changed." "I had a reason to." As FBI agents moved in to take Dattilo into custody, as his men surrendered their weapons and were loaded into waiting vehicles, Angel walked away from the shipyard without looking back. His phone rang. The safe house. "She's asking for you again," the guard said. "Won't go to sleep until you get here." Angel climbed into his SUV, his body exhausted but his mind finally at peace. He'd won. Not just the war against Dattilo, but the war against himself. And he had a little girl waiting for him who'd reminded him what it meant to be human. 6 months had passed since the night Angel Siciliano walked into a federal prosecutor's office with Victor Datillo in handcuffs, and enough evidence to dismantle a trafficking network that had operated across 5 states for nearly a decade. The trials were still ongoing. Datillo had kept his word, testifying against dozens of buyers, corrupted officials, and fellow criminals. The FBI had rescued over 60 children from various locations. Families were being reunited. Lives were being slowly, painfully rebuilt. Angel's role in all of it had been carefully erased from official records. The prosecutor knew. The FBI knew. But publicly, Angel Siciliano remained what he'd always been, a name whispered in dark rooms, a shadow operating on the edges of law and order. But privately, Angel had changed in ways no one who'd known him before would recognize. Tuesday afternoon, the Red Lantern Diner was quieter than usual. The lunch rush had passed, leaving only a handful of customers scattered across the booths. The same red neon hummed through the windows. The same waitress refilled coffee cups without being asked. But the corner booth, Angel's booth, looked different than it had 6 months ago. Angel sat in his usual spot, but he wasn't alone. Beside him, swinging her legs because they didn't quite reach the floor, was Peggy Hash. She was working on a math worksheet, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. Every few minutes, she'd look up at Angel and ask for help, and he'd patiently explain the problem until she understood. Across from them sat Aunt Maggie, fully recovered from her injuries, looking healthier and happier than she had in years. Angel had set her up with a new apartment in a secure building. He'd paid for the best doctors. He'd even helped her open the small bakery she'd always dreamed of just 2 blocks from the diner, where she made the best pastries in Chicago and where Peggy helped after school. "I don't get this one," Peggy said, pointing to a particularly complicated fraction problem. Angel looked at it, then grabbed a napkin and drew a circle, dividing it into pieces. "If you have a pizza cut into 8 slices, and you eat 3, what fraction of the pizza did you eat? 3/8. Right. Now what if your aunt ate 2 slices? Peggy thought for a moment. Then she ate 2/8, which is the same as 1/4 if you simplify it. Exactly. Angel ruffled her hair, and she grinned up at him. Maggie watched this interaction with something like wonder. 6 months ago, she'd feared Angel Siciliano. Now, she watched him patiently teach fractions to her niece and saw something she never expected, a man who'd found redemption in the most unlikely place. "You're getting good at this," Maggie said. "Maybe you should have been a teacher instead of—" She trailed off, not quite sure how to finish that sentence. "Instead of what I am?" Angel's lips quirked into the smallest smile. "Probably, but I don't think I'd have the patience for a whole classroom. Just one student?" "Just one." Angel looked at Peggy, who was now working on the next problem with renewed confidence. "One is enough." Tony appeared in the diner doorway and caught Angel's eye. "Business." Angel nodded. "I'll be right back," he told Peggy. She grabbed his sleeve. "You promise?" "I promise." Satisfied, she returned to her homework. Outside, Tony handed Angel a folder. The last of Datillo's lieutenants. Found him trying to restart operations in Detroit. Local FBI picked him up an hour ago. Angel flipped through the file, then closed it. "That's all of them, then. Every last one." Tony looked at his boss with something like pride. "We did it. The network is gone. For now. Someone else will try to rebuild eventually. Someone always does. And when they do, we'll be watching." Angel handed the folder back. "Make sure our contacts in law enforcement know we're still monitoring. Anyone who tries to traffic children through this city, through any city we can reach, gets shut down immediately. You've become quite the humanitarian, boss." Angel's expression darkened slightly. "I'm not a humanitarian. I'm just a man making up for lost time." Back inside the diner, Peggy had finished her homework and was drawing on the back of her worksheet. Angel slid back into the booth and looked at her artwork, a child's rendering of the diner, with stick figures sitting at a table. She'd labeled them carefully. "Aunt Maggie, me, and Angel. That's us," she said proudly. "I can tell. You're a good artist. My teacher says I should enter the art contest at school. But I don't know what to draw. Draw what matters to you." Peggy considered this seriously. Then she looked up at him, with those dark eyes that still sometimes carried shadows of what she'd endured, but now also held light, hope, trust. "Will you come to my school's parent day?" she asked suddenly. "It's next month. Aunt Maggie's coming, but if you're not too busy." Angel felt that familiar tightening in his chest, the one that happened whenever Peggy reminded him that he mattered to someone, that his presence made a difference. "I'll be there," he said. "Promise?" "Promise." Peggy's face lit up with a smile that could have powered the entire city. Later that evening, after taking Peggy and Maggie home, Angel returned to his main office. Tommy and Rico were waiting with weekly reports, territory disputes, collection numbers, the usual business of running a criminal empire. But as they talked, Angel found his attention drifting to the photograph on his desk, the one of Lucia he'd kept hidden for 30 years. It sat in a frame now, in plain sight. Not hidden anymore, not a secret shame, but a memory honored. Beside it was a new photograph, one of Peggy at her 8th birthday party last month, a party Angel had insisted on throwing, complete with a cake from Maggie's bakery and more presents than any one child could possibly need. In the photo, Peggy was laughing, frosting on her nose, surrounded by friends from school and a few carefully chosen adults who'd helped in her recovery. Angel was in the background of that photo, watching from the doorway. But if you looked closely, you could see the smallest smile on his face. "Boss?" Tommy's voice pulled him back. "You okay?" "Yeah." Angel looked at both photographs, past and present. Loss and redemption. The little girl he'd failed, and the one he'd saved. "I'm okay." Later, alone in his office, Angel pulled out his phone and looked at the message Peggy had convinced Maggie to help her send earlier. "Thank you for coming to the diner today, and for helping with math, and for everything. You're not my dad, but you're the man who came when I cried for help. I love you." Angel read it 3 times. Then he saved it and turned off his phone. For 30 years, he'd believed Lucia's loss had destroyed him, turned him into something cold and inhuman, made him into a monster. But maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe that loss had simply been waiting for Peggy Hash to run into his diner on a rain-soaked Tuesday night and grab his jacket with small, desperate hands. Waiting for him to realize that redemption wasn't something you earned. It was something you chose. Every day. Every moment. Every time you decided to be better than what your past had made you. Angel Siciliano would never be a good man. He'd done too much, hurt too many people, crossed too many lines. His hands would never be clean. But maybe, just maybe, he could be a good man to one little girl who'd chosen to trust him when she had no reason to trust anyone. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. Outside his window, Chicago glittered in the darkness, a city of millions, of countless stories, of endless second chances. Angel turned off the lights and headed home. To the safe house he'd turned into a real house, where guards had become protectors, and fear had slowly transformed into something that looked almost like family. Tomorrow, Peggy would visit the diner again. She'd ask for help with homework, or tell him about school, or simply sit beside him while he conducted business. Her small presence a reminder that some things mattered more than territory or power or respect. Tomorrow, Angel would show up for her, just like he had every day for the past 6 months, just like he would every day for as long as she needed him. Because 30 years ago, he'd failed to protect the little girl he loved. But this time, he'd gotten it right, and that made all the difference. Thanks for sticking with this story till the end. If you enjoyed it, you're going to love the next one. It's packed with unexpected turns and heartfelt moments. Click the image on your screen to keep the journey going, and make sure to hit subscribe for more amazing stories. Drop a comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I can't wait to see what you think.